Awesome. Good morning, guys. I am Nate. Man, you guys sounded great this morning. It was great to be here and worship with you guys. You guys look great this morning. So it's great to be here with you guys. I am the campus pastor at our Campbell County location. Good morning to my location, and of course, good morning to the Union location. It's great to be here at Burlington. I feel like it's been a while. It has been a while. A lot of cool stuff has happened. Some new faces here. It's great to see Brett in his first week here as your guys' campus pastor. What a sharp guy. We're super glad to have him on the team. And Nathan Yoakum, your guys' new student director here at this location. Got to meet him. Also super sharp guy. Really glad to have him on the team. So we're in a series now, the book of James. Last week we heard from Darren in a very challenging message, at least it was very challenging to me, about taming the tongue. Taming the tongue. And in this week we're going to stay in the book of James. As Darren has said and others that we're teaching have said, very practical book, very pragmatic. I have found it very challenging in practical ways. So James, we know, is the brother to Christ. Little brother, younger brother, right? Half brother, I guess technically. Same mama, right? Different dads, for sure, between those two. Yeah. Came up in the same sort of humble circumstances as Christ, right? Son of a tecton, of a carpenter up in Nazareth, but also wound up becoming the leader of the Jerusalem church. So pretty impressive guy was James. But I want you guys for a second just to imagine what that would have been like for James to grow up as with Jesus Christ as your older brother, right? I have an older brother. His experience was probably very different from mine. Arguably one of the first disciples of Christ, right? Because they just would have been hanging around all that time. But all his life he followed, even his older brother. It speaks volumes to me. And I think that of all the stuff that James would have seen in his lifetime and all that he could have shared about the person of Christ and all the questions he could have answered about the life of Christ because he had such a unique and intimate perspective of Christ. But all that stuff that he could have said, all the questions that he could have answered that the gospel writers never got to, he didn't do any of that. But that this very practical, sort of very pragmatic, challenging book is what God saw fit to provide us through his servant James. And so today, we're going to pick up in James 3. Darren left off last week with verse 12. We're going to pick right back up in verse 13, and I'm going to read to the end of chapter 3. James says this: "Who among you is wise and understanding? Who among you is wise and understanding? Let them show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't be arrogant and so lie against the truth. This wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there's disorder and every evil thing. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. And the seed whose fruit is righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace." Okay, what's going on here? Pretty much up until this section in James, James's message has basically been faith demonstrated by works. Faith shown by works. Not that you gain faith from works. Not that works secure justification for us or secure salvation for us, but that works indicate, they're a marker of living faith in someone's life. So if you want to know if you have living faith, James says, what are you up to? What are you about? Is your life marked by commitment to God and his precepts? Do you like to study God, or do you want to actually serve and follow him, right? That's what it's been up till now. But here in verse 13, James makes a significant shift. He makes a shift. He shifts from faith shown by works to wisdom shown by gentleness, right? Wisdom shown by gentleness. He asks, who among you is wise? Let him show by his deeds in gentleness. Gentleness. Some translations say meekness. That's a fair translation. Or even humility, right? But they all mean the same thing, same idea. And we're going to get to that more here in a minute and unpack that more here in a minute. But we can see that true wisdom is marked by, it's demonstrated by, it's shown by behavior of meekness, humility, right? Gentleness in our deeds and behavior. But James says there's another kind of wisdom, another school of thought, another way of thinking, and this wisdom is not from above. He says it's earthly. Its standards are earthly. Its sources are earthly. It measures success in worldly terms. And it's marked not by gentleness, but by self-ambition, by arrogance and pride. And so James immediately provides us with like the opposite or an antithesis of this idea of meekness. He says, but if you have jealousy, if you have selfish ambition in your heart. So on one side we have gentleness, meekness, humility, but then on the other side, it's selfish ambition. It's arrogance. It's jealousy. It's pride. And so, effectively, in these verses, James sets up one of the greatest struggles of our human experience. Arrogance versus meekness. Selfish ambition versus humility. Pride versus gentleness. And he says that these are going to be shown by a demonstration of the wisdom we employ as we navigate our life, our worldview. That it's natural wisdom versus wisdom from above. It's earthly knowledge versus kingdom knowledge. God's knowledge versus our own knowledge, right? And it's a battle that we all face in our efforts to serve the Lord. In fact, it's one of the great themes of the Bible, this idea. We see it from the very beginning all the way back to Genesis, right? It was arrogance that the serpent played on when he said, did God really say, don't eat this? And it was selfish ambition, natural wisdom that said, hey, but if you do eat this, you could be like him. The creature could be like the creator, right? Barclay says it's our epidemic vice. It's our great engagement. It's our great struggle to be killing selfish ambition and to be giving life to meekness. And James says that our victory starts with the way that we think, with the wisdom we choose to operate under, with our sort of worldview. James says that natural wisdom, the wisdom of this world, leads to selfish ambition, that it leads to arrogance, stinking pride, right? Stinking pride, and God hates it. God seems to particularly dislike this one, right? And the Old Testament uses words like stiff-necked, haughty, conceited, stubborn, obstinate, right? It's self-ambition, it's self-focus. And it's a tough one because it literally permeates our entire existence. And we produce the self-ambition, arrogance, pride. We produce it in our heart over and over and over again. And it's sneaky, particularly like insidious and sneaky. It shows up without knowing, right? And it's almost impossible to avoid. And then when you do maybe make some headway, it's like you get one down, another one just pops up. It's like whack-a-mole, you know? That's an old reference. So, so I don't know, I was 30 or so. That's a true story. And I was at school. I was at Southern Seminary, Boyce College, and I was already married, and I think we had already started having kids. And before I started school, before I started college, I had this pickup truck. It was a 4x4 pickup truck. Man, I loved this truck. But we had to get rid of it, and we got a minivan instead for my wife to drive our kids, because we had this growing family. And I took over my wife's car. It was a 94 Mitsubishi Galant, and it was the biggest piece of trash on the road. Truly. It had like one hubcap remaining. A hubcap passed me one time on the road. That's a true story. The headliner was like super droopy, that like I wore it like a hat every time that I got in the car. And it like leaked coolant. It had all these problems. And every single window in the car was broken, and they were held in place by, I just stuffed Greek vocab cards down in the weather stripping. That's how the windows were held up. But I can remember one time I was at my mom's house, and she just remarked, she said, "Nate, I'm so proud of you." I said, "What are you talking about, Mom?" And she said, "Well, even 3 years ago, you wouldn't have been caught dead driving this car. You would not have let anyone see you drive. You just had a lot of your identity and a lot of your pride, man, since you were little, has been wrapped up in your vehicle." But I never thought about that. I said, "Well, thanks, Mom." I went about my day. And then I can remember pulling onto the campus of Southern Seminary in Louisville, and I was walking away from my car headed to class, and I looked back at my car, and I thought to myself, my mom is right. I am super humble. I did. It's a true story. I said, "Man, I'm super humble. Look at this. I don't even care." And then I looked around. This is a true story. I looked around the parking lot at Southern Seminary. I thought, man, I'm probably the most humble guy here on campus at a Bible college, right? True story. And then immediately I was like, oh no. How quickly I took this instance of humility and turned it immediately into a point of pride for myself. It's sneaky, and it just keeps coming back, right? It's basically our focus on self. Just about any focus on self. It's actually a form of self-worship. It's totally anthropocentric. It's totally focused on man. It's all about man. And selfishness is often blinding, right? In fact, one of the biblical Greek words or family of words that's used to describe self-focus conveys the idea of blindness, right? Or literally, it means enveloped in smoke, right? We can't see it. It can be really hard to recognize in ourselves. So here's a challenge. You guys can try this if you're feeling brave. I can remember also this is before that, I was a young believer, maybe brand new sort of baby believer. I was living with these guys, two guys, Brad and Steve, great guys, Christian guys, like the first Christian friends that I had. And this sort of mentor of mine challenged me, like, "Hey, you should find pride in your life." So, yeah, I'll figure it out. I'll talk to Brad and Steve. They know me well. So I asked these guys, I sat them down and said, "Hey, would you guys share with me places where you see me being selfish in my life?" These guys, "I don't know, man." So it started off with them being really reluctant to share. But then it ended with me saying, hey guys, all right, shut up, right? It can be really hard to see. So, as an exercise in self-examination, I want to talk about this morning a short list of selfish ambition, of pride, of jealousy that we may not often think about, right? It can be hard to see in ourselves. So this morning, I want you guys to be honest with yourselves as we go through this short list. And if you're being honest this morning, some of this stuff will likely sting a little bit, right? But remember, I said this is for self-examination. This list is not for others' examination. It's not for spouse examination or child examination or mother-in-law examination. None of that, right? Self-examination. So this is marks of or manifestations of self-ambition, of arrogance, of pride that can be in our lives. Number one, I just shared with you guys, obviously there's like that false humility, right, that I recognized in myself right there in the parking lot of my school, right? But also, sort of the flip side of that is self-pity, or people that are self-absorbed with like a sense of failure, right? Just kind of that Eeyore attitude all the time, right? That's also self-focus. It's also sort of self-absorption. And then obviously, right, seeing yourself as better than others always and inflating your own importance, your own gifts and abilities, that's arrogance, right? But focusing on your lack of gifts and abilities and undervaluing and having a wrong view of your importance is usually also selfish and self-ambition. This is a big one for me. People who are selfish, I'll speak for myself. Whenever I talk about my rights or what I deserve, you can bet that some intensely haughty stuff is about to come out of my wicked little heart, right? Whenever I talk about that stuff. Really, just about any time that I use the first person personal pronoun, me or I, there's probably some haughty stuff about to come out of my mouth, right? Talking about yourself. People that are haughty love to talk about themselves. People that are ate up with pride love to talk about themselves. They're also easily offended. People that are stuck in they're overly bothered by criticism. Can't get over it. People that are stuck in pride are fiercely independent. Selfish ambition loves independence and loves to talk about it. Here's one. James already said it. Jealousy or bitterness or even a general sense of dissatisfaction, right? Or people that are prideful are consumed with what others think. They refuse to ask forgiveness, often don't admit mistakes. They're easily inconvenienced. All these are likely expressions of selfish ambition, of arrogance. But James wants to help us. He wants to help us out. James, right here in this section, he does something very interesting. He connects all of these manifestations of pride, all these behaviors, all these deeds with the way that we think. What we think affects our behavior. It affects what we do. He says our selfish ambition, our arrogance, are a result of a wrong thinking, wrong school of thought, right? And as we said, James says there's another wisdom, another way of thinking, another school of thought that's not from above, and that this wisdom is focused on self. We see it all the time in our culture. This wisdom says, you got to look out for number one. Makes sense, right? You got to look out for number one. It's a school of thought that says, I would never let someone disrespect me that way, right? Or it says, what? what's the big deal? I'm just trying to get ahead. Or I don't deserve to be treated this way. Or it says, I don't think so. I was here first. Or this is mine. Or they're on their own. As described, this is the wisdom of our planet. It's earthly. It's natural. Even, James says, demonic and evil. So the key to overcoming selfish ambition like this, James says, is embracing another way of thinking, right? Another kind of wisdom, the wisdom from above, the thinking of God himself. And this school of thought, this way of thinking, this wisdom is marked by, demonstrated by meekness. He says, but natural wisdom directly contradicts the wisdom from above. Earthly wisdom leads to disorder and every evil thing. But James says that the wisdom from above is pure, cleansed of ulterior motive, cleansed of pride. The wisdom of the world is focused on self. The wisdom from above is focused on God. It's theocentric, right? It's all about God. And by extension, those made in his image. By extension, it's focused on others. Natural wisdom is contentious and jealous, but James says the wisdom from above is peaceable. It's happy for others when they receive good. Wisdom that is not from above makes us haughty, makes us think like we know. But I love this next word in the series that James uses here in verse 17. When it was up on the screen before, it was translated as reasonable. Some versions say submissive, right? Reasonable, submissive. Another says open to reason. That's what Eric read, open to reason. The NKJV is my favorite of all things. The New King James says willing to yield. Willing to yield, right? This word that is reasonable in my Bible, it's used exactly one time in all of Scriptures. One time, this appearance here in James. It's eupetes is the word, one use. And it literally means, you could say, easily obedient. That's a fair translation. Readily compliant. But the idea carries, it's even more emphatic. It's like easily influenced. Or you could say readily, or you could say easily persuaded even. It's like I said, it's very strongly worded, very emphatic, almost to the point like of being a pushover. You're easily persuaded, right? Wisdom from above is willing to yield. Wisdom from above does not hold a grudge, doesn't need to get revenge. It's merciful. It's merciful. James says the wisdom of the world produces selfish ambition, but God's wisdom produces meekness. Right? So here's the flip side of the coin. James says our wisdom will be shown by our deeds, by our behavior. So before we talk about how to change our thinking, I want to look sort of at the flip side. Let's look at some manifestations of meekness. We looked at manifestations of self-ambition, but let's talk about manifestations, marks of humility. What do humble people look like? So generally, humble people are thankful and grateful. They're thankful and grateful, even when the food's bad. They're thankful and grateful even when the service is slow, right? They're thankful and grateful. Humble people see themselves as no better than others. No better than others. They're gentle and patient. They're not focused on what they want, right? Gentle people are good listeners. They consider what others have to say as more important than what comes out of their own yapper, right? They're good listeners. Meek people are gladly submissive and obedient to those in authority. Well, that's a tough one, huh? gladly submissive and obedient to those in authority. Humble people are quick to admit when they're wrong. Are you quick to admit when you're wrong? Humble people see themselves as having no right to question or judge an almighty and perfect God. Ugh. They recognize and trust God's character, right? All of these are true marks of meekness, right? That's what we want. That's what I want to see mark us as a body. But how do we get there? How do we shift our thinking? How do we change from natural, earthly, wicked wisdom to what God says is the wisdom from above? And so I have a short list here to close our time. And number one, how do we shift our thinking? How do we move from earthly wisdom to the wisdom from above? Number one is pray. You just pray. Ask God to show you. Lord, would you, next time that I'm thinking something arrogant, or I'm feeling, or I say, or I do something arrogant, would you just show it to me? I know it's hard to see. Or even James says already, if any of you, said this all the way back in chapter 1, it feels like a long time ago. He said, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask. And God will give generously, right? Number one is pray. Number two, read. Number two is read. Read your Bible. Specifically, here's what I recommend: Psalms, Proverbs, or the prophets. If you want to get an accurate view of God, a high view of God, and an appropriate view of self, it's a great place to start. The Psalms, Proverbs, or the prophets, right? Read. Number three, how do we shift our thinking? Just look, right? Look at yourself. Seek out instances of arrogance and selfish ambition in your thinking, in your motives, right? But also in your speech and in your communication. Also in your deeds and in your behavior. So what you think, what you say, what you do, it's easy enough to go back. Hey, did I say anything bananas prideful today? It's possible. What was it? Don't say that again, right? It's pretty straightforward. Number four, ask, right? I did that. I've done it since, not with those guys. It didn't work out so well the first time, but I've done it since. I'm sure that everyone here can find at least one person that knows them, that loves them, and wants to tell them the truth, right? Could be your spouse. Could be your spouse. Maybe not. Listen, if you don't have that person in your life, you can email Brett Parker at bparker. He'd love to do that. Find someone in your life that's going to tell you the truth about when your behavior, when your speech, when your thinking is off. And this is the last one. I want to close with this one. And it's like a Sunday school answer, but nonetheless, nothing has rung truer than what I'm about to say. If you want to reject self-ambition and reject arrogance and reject pride in your life, and you want to embrace meekness and gentleness and humility, look to the person of Jesus Christ. There's never been a better picture of these ever. It's literally perfect. That's the heart of his message from the very beginning. Right? Literally just went from town to town. He said the same thing over and over. That was his message. Humility, meekness, gentleness, right? And it was revolutionary. No one had ever heard that kind of thing before. That's what that idea of meekness, gentleness, humility, it's what made his message so revolutionary, that he said the first will be last and the last will be first. He flipped the entire value system of the world up to that time on its head. He said the first will be last and the last will be first. We embrace meekness, right? And goodness, if there was ever a man that had rights, if there was ever a man that deserved to be the center of attention, that deserved respect, even praise and worship. Guys, it's a mercy. It's an act of gentleness and meekness that we can even speak his name, that you could even in that time look upon him when he walked the earth, that you didn't immediately just try to start to dig with your face, right? Isaiah 6 says, hey, in the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord. I saw Jesus Christ, lofty and exalted. And the train of his robe was filling the temple, and there were seraphim above him, and they had 6 wings, and with 2 they covered their face, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew, and one cried out to the other, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. And the thresholds shook, the foundations shook. And Isaiah said, I'm undone. I can't even look. That's Jesus Christ. That's the same Jesus Christ that was walking the earth. No one should have even been able to talk. I mean, just that you could say, hey, Jesus, and see him was an act of incredible meekness and humility on his part. Incredible. Shouldn't have even been able to look on him. But he didn't get any of that. On the contrary, he was beaten by his own creature, spat upon. And in the face of all that, still demonstrated perfect meekness. His word says silent before his accusers. If anybody ever had a right, and he demonstrated it over and over and over in his speech, in his thoughts, in his deeds, in his behavior, right? Even, like I said, coming in the form of a man was an incredible act of humility. Allowed himself to suffer at the hands of his creatures in obedience, right? He who like, we're going to, they likely plucked out his beard in handfuls. Like whenever you see him on the cross, he's always got that full beard, but he likely would not have it. It had just been bloody patches on his face, right? Can you imagine the indignity? He demonstrated it over and over and over. He washed his disciples' feet. I think my favorite example, though, of the gentleness of Christ, the meekness of Christ, the humility of Christ, the perfect humility on full display, was his arrest in the garden. Imagine this point in time that the creatures seek to seize and accuse the Creator. Like we're just going to go snatch him up and make him pay. What? It's like the absolute pinnacle of pride. I can't get over it, right? What must he have been thinking in that moment? Knowing, I mean, he knew, he hinted at it even. Hey, I just have to say the word. You've come to arrest me like a criminal at night? I literally can say one word and smite every single person within eyesight of me. He hinted at it, but he didn't do it. You know what he said? They said, hey, are you the one? He said, I am. And those words alone knocked those people off their feet, right? What a picture of humility in that moment, right? Imagine what he must have been feeling, what he must have been thinking. Talk about eupetes. Talk about readily obedient and willing to yield. James says, but the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. So, the next time that you are tempted to be selfish, the next time that you want to have a pity party, or the next time that you get cut off in traffic and you were clearly in the right? The next time someone owes you something, the next time that you're indignant at some perceived offense, the next time you want to talk about yourself, the next time that you want to make sure that they know that certain thing about you, right? Try to think about it differently. Not natural wisdom, but wisdom from above. So instead of trying to get ahead of them, put them first. And instead of, and don't take what you're owed, give to them. Or how about this? Submit to them. Don't give them what they deserve. Forgive them. Don't talk about yourself. Talk about Christ. Forget how you look. Forget how you're remembered and what they remember about you. Make sure that they know something about Christ. Will you guys pray with me to close our time? Oh, Lord, would you help us? Like I said, man, we want to change this thing. We want to become more like Christ, but sometimes we don't even see it in ourselves. So would you start with that, Lord? Would you help every single heart and mind here recognize haughtiness, recognize stiff-necked, recognize self-ambition and arrogance when it appears in our life? And I'm sure it will. Help us, God. Help us to change and grow. Thank you for the perfect example of meekness and humility that we have in the person of Jesus Christ. It's part of what made him a worthy sacrifice on our behalf. Thank you that we can look to him. God, I pray for First Church that as a body, as individuals, that we be marked by meekness, marked by humility in our speech, Lord, in our care for others, in our thoughts, in our deeds and behavior. Would this church, First Church of Christ, be marked by, known as a place of humility, as a place of meekness and Christ-likeness. We love you, God. We seek to serve you with our very lives. In the mighty name of Jesus Christ, amen.